At the international airport, amidst the bustling crowd, a shocking scene was taking place. A black woman in a luxurious suit, sharp eyes full of intelligence, was handcuffed by two white policemen in broad daylight. She did not struggle, did not scream. She just stood there, coldly staring straight at those who were abusing their power. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Her voice rang out, calm but sharp as a knife cutting into the arrogance of the two policemen, but they only sneered. "A black guy likes to play the important role, right?" Little did they know that in just a few minutes everything would change completely. They did not know that the woman they had just insulted was not an ordinary citizen. And when the truth was revealed, their careers would end right there. What led to this fateful moment? And what will be the fate of those who abuse power? Let's enter today's story. It was a cold morning at JFK International Airport in New York. Passengers were hurrying through security checkpoints, dragging their suitcases, trying to catch their flights or find their way out. Loudspeakers echoed throughout the vast space, announcing the departure and arrival schedules. At the arrivals area from Washington, D.C., Dr. Monica Harris emerged with a confident and professional demeanor. She was a tall black woman in her 40s, with a healthy brown complexion and a serious yet authoritative face. Her sharp eyes reflected intelligence and experience, as if she was always ready to observe and analyze everything around her. Today, Monica wore a finely tailored black suit, an elegant Rolex watch on her wrist, further enhancing the demeanor of a powerful woman. Her naturally curly hair was tied back at the nape of her neck, revealing the sharp lines of her face. Every step she took was decisive and strong, without any hesitation or shyness. Monica is not only a senior FBI official, but also one of the leading experts in the field of organized crime and internal corruption. With over 20 years of experience in the field, she has led many major investigations, solved many shocking cases, and contributed to bringing many corrupt officials to justice. She is no stranger to suspicious looks and gossip behind her back, especially from those who are not used to seeing a black woman in a position of power. But Monica has never let those prejudices stand in her way. Her trip to New York this time was not to investigate a case, but to attend an important national security conference. She had just had a closed-door meeting with senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI in Washington, D.C., where she presented her latest report on financial crimes involving transnational organizations. Now she was in New York to continue the discussion with experts and representatives from various agencies. Even though she was used to frequent business trips, Monica still felt a little tired after a long day at work, but she didn't let that affect her appearance. As she walked out of the security check area, she took a deep breath, absorbing the bustling atmosphere of the airport, and continued walking towards the exit. However, she had no idea that from the moment she appeared, two gazes had been glued to her from afar. James Walker and Brian Carter, two airport police officers, were standing in a corner near the baggage claim area. Both were white men, wearing police uniforms with shiny badges on their chests. James, the taller one with short blonde hair, crossed his arms over his chest and eyed Monica with a questioning gaze. Brian, a slightly shorter but well-built man, nudged his colleague and whispered something. They both chuckled, then began to talk. "I bet she flew business class," James said with a smirk. "Sure. A black woman dressed like that? Too weird," Brian chuckled. James nodded, his eyes never leaving Monica. "Maybe a smuggler or some kind of crook. Did you see that haughty look on her face? Something was definitely wrong." Brian laughed. "Yeah, the 'I'm better than you all' thing? I hate that." James lowered his voice, but his tone was still full of malice. "What do you think if we check her out a bit? See if there's anything suspicious about her?" Brian shrugged, looking amused. "I don't mind. If something goes wrong, we'll have an excuse to arrest him." The two looked at each other, as if they had understood the plan. Then, without further ado, they started walking towards Monica, their faces showing their arrogance and prejudice. Monica, still unaware of this unwanted attention, continued walking with confidence. But in just a moment, she would be stopped, and things would quickly take a completely different turn. Monica walked down the wide airport corridor, heading toward the baggage claim area. All around her, other passengers were bustling about, dragging heavy suitcases, carrying on hurried conversations, or busying themselves on their phones. But in the midst of the bustling crowd, two figures in police uniforms were approaching, their faces filled with malice. James Walker and Brian Carter strode forward, their eyes fixed on Monica as if they had spotted a potential threat. When they were only a few feet away, James cleared his throat and called out, his voice deep and authoritative, but laced with condescension. "You there!" Monica stopped immediately and turned around. Her sharp eyes flashed with surprise as she saw two policemen approaching her with stern expressions. She quickly took in their demeanor. Both of them had an imperious air, their chins raised in defiance. Deep down, she had a bad feeling. James stood in front of Monica, his arms crossed over his chest. Brian stood to one side, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "What is it?" Monica asked, her voice calm but firm. James raised an eyebrow. "Can you show me some identification?" Monica narrowed her eyes. She had passed through all the security checks legally. There was no reason to be stopped like this. She was no stranger to situations like this, to being discriminated against simply because of the color of her skin. But she didn't react immediately. "I need to know why you asked me to do this," she said, her voice still calm. Brian sneered, crossing his arms. "We reserve the right to ask anyone for identification if we suspect anything, and from what I can tell, you look pretty suspicious." Monica kept her gaze hard, but she could sense the injustice of the situation. "Suspicious?" She raised an eyebrow. "So may I ask what specifically about me makes you suspicious?" James shook his head, clicking his tongue. "This isn't an interrogation, girl. You're not cooperating, are you? If you have nothing to hide, hand over your papers." She took a deep breath, keeping her composure. Monica knew her rights. She had not broken any rules, and there was no sign of suspicious behavior. But she also knew that in the eyes of these two men, her skin color was enough of a reason to be suspicious. She slowly opened her bag, took out her high-quality leather wallet, and pulled out her driver's license and official identification card. She handed them to James without flinching. James glanced at the papers but didn't reach for them. Instead, he gave a sarcastic smile. Brian stood beside him, nudging his colleague's arm, looking amused. "Wow, you sure are prepared," Brian said, his tone mocking. "Is this for real? Or is it just one of those things someone can easily buy on the black market?" Monica blinked, not believing what she had just heard. Anger began to well up inside her, but she kept her tone calm. "Are you saying that my legal papers are fake?" James crossed his arms, smirking. "We were just doing our job. We saw someone like you, dressed too well, looking suspiciously confident. We just wanted to make sure you weren't up to anything." Someone like her. The phrase rang in Monica's head, making her instantly understand what was really going on here. Not because she was suspicious, but because in their eyes, a black woman wearing an expensive suit, walking confidently through the airport, was unacceptable. She squeezed his hand lightly, but kept her voice calm. "I demand that you check my papers immediately. If not, I reserve the right to leave." Brian laughed, as if she had said something incredibly funny. "Who do you think you are?" He smirked, then turned to James. "She must think she's someone important." James nodded, seeming to agree. "A black woman in expensive clothes. Don't you think it's strange, Brian?" Monica tightened her grip on her bag, feeling heat rising in her chest. She was used to situations like this, but she couldn't always control her anger. "I will not stand here and let you insult me," she said firmly. I have presented my proper papers, and I have the right to be treated as fairly as any other passenger." James's expression immediately changed, his eyes becoming colder. He took a step forward, almost pressing his face against hers. "Listen, girl," he growled. "We get to decide who's suspicious here. And if I say you are, then you are." Brian stood beside her, arms crossed and smirking. "You think you can get away with that attitude. But unfortunately, there are no special privileges for you here." Monica gritted her teeth but held her ground. "I will not let you abuse your power like this. You are discriminating against me just because of the color of my skin, and I will not accept that." There was a moment of silence. Then James smirked and nodded to Brian. "She's being stubborn," James said. "Maybe we should teach her a lesson about cooperating with the police." Before Monica could react, Brian grabbed her wrists and twisted them back. A cold pair of handcuffs locked her wrists in an instant. Monica was startled but immediately struggled. "What are you doing? I did nothing wrong." James stood before her, his eyes challenging. "You are under arrest for not cooperating with security. If I were you, I would shut my mouth immediately." Monica felt her blood boil. She stared at the two abusers of power before her, knowing that this would not be a simple confrontation. But she also knew one thing. They had made a big mistake. A mistake for which they would soon pay. The cold handcuffs tightened around Monica's wrists, but she remained calm. She had faced more dangerous situations in her career, threats, stalking, even standing at gunpoint with notorious drug dealers. But she had never imagined that she would find herself in such a blatant abuse of power at a major American airport simply because of the color of her skin. Brian shoved her shoulder, forcing her forward. "Come on, noble lady," he sneered. "Let's see how much more head you can carry when you enter the station." Monica didn't protest, didn't scream. She just stared at the two men in front of her with cold eyes. She knew exactly what they were doing. They thought they could humiliate her, turn her into a silent victim like so many other black people who had been wronged, but they didn't know that they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. "I advise you to check my identity immediately," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Otherwise, you will pay dearly for this action." James laughed, turning to Brian. "Did you hear that? She's threatening us." Brian shrugged, smiling wryly. "She must think she's someone important." Monica's expression didn't change. She knew that arguing with these people was useless. Instead, she looked straight at them and repeated word for word, "Look up my identity. Now." James was about to say something, but another voice spoke first. "Hey, what's going on?" They all turned. An airport security officer, wearing a dark blue uniform with a name tag on his chest, was walking quickly toward them. It was David Reynolds, a veteran of JFK for more than 2 decades. As he walked by, he happened to see Monica in handcuffs and immediately sensed something was wrong. "What is this?" Reynolds asked, his eyes glancing over Monica and back to James and Brian. James smirked, crossing his arms. "Just a suspicious person who won't cooperate. We're taking her in for questioning." Reynolds studied Monica closely. There was something about her that felt familiar. Her calm demeanor, her authoritative demeanor, and especially her sharp, confident gaze. Then, suddenly, it hit him. His eyes widened. "Wait, this is Dr. Monica Harris?" James and Brian were stunned for a moment. Reynolds turned to them immediately, his voice more urgent. "Do you two know who she is? She's a high-ranking FBI official." Brian laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, are you kidding? Just because a black woman wears a suit doesn't mean she's a big shot." James laughed too. "Yeah, she probably thought she could fool us by dressing like a director." Monica said nothing, just stared at the two men before her. She knew that even when warned, they wouldn't believe her. That's how racists operate. They believe their own prejudices more than the facts before their eyes. Reynolds shook his head, his expression grim. "I'm serious. If you don't believe me, you better check it out right now. If you really did handcuff an FBI agent, I swear you're in big trouble." James and Brian looked at each other. They still didn't believe it, but Reynolds's tone made them waver a little. "There's no need to test," James pouted. "I don't need anyone to teach me how to do my job." Brian laughed, folding his arms and looking at Monica. "She must be one of those big-time black people. There are always some of them." Reynolds let out a sigh and shook his head in frustration. He knew that if these two officers continued like this, they would not only lose their jobs, but also face serious charges. He didn't want to get involved in this mess, but he also couldn't stand by and watch the injustice happening right before his eyes. Before he could say more, another voice came over James's walkie-talkie. "Walker, Carter, report immediately. I just received word of a serious problem with an arrest. Confirm the identity of the arrestee immediately." It was the voice of Captain Robert Mitchell, their immediate superior. James frowned, looking annoyed. "It was just a simple check, sir. Nothing serious." "Check identification now." Captain Mitchell's voice grew firmer. "Now!" James muttered something under his breath, then reluctantly pulled out his phone. He entered Monica's driver's license information into the ID system. Brian stood beside him, arms crossed, his expression still defiant. Just a few seconds later, when the screen displayed the results, James's expression immediately changed. He stood there dumbfounded, his eyes glued to the information in front of him. Brian frowned, looking at his colleague's screen. James and Brian stood frozen like statues. Both stared at the phone screen, which displayed the identity of the woman they had just brutally and mercilessly treated. The words, "Dr. Monica Harris, senior FBI official," stabbed straight into their false confidence and power. Brian was the first to react. His face was pale, his hands shaking unconsciously. This can't be," he stammered. "It can't be." James was no better. His whole body was stiff, his throat dry. He had arrested innocent people many times in his career as a police officer based on prejudice, but this was the first time he realized he had made an irreversible mistake. Meanwhile, Monica stood still, her eyes as sharp as a cold knife. She did not show any anger, did not scream, did not struggle. She just silently observed them, and that made James and Brian even more afraid. Finally, James hurried over and fumbled to remove the handcuffs from Monica's hands. He was so clumsy that he almost dropped the key on the floor. When the handcuffs popped open, Monica rubbed her wrists, the red marks still visible. "Dr. Harris, I'm so sorry," James stammered, his voice losing all its arrogance. "We didn't know, it was a misunderstanding." Brian also nodded quickly, trying to correct the mistake. "That's right. We were just following security procedures. We didn't mean anything by it." "My sincere apologies, ma'am." Monica raised her eyebrows, slowly crossing her arms. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice full of sarcasm. James nodded vigorously. "Yes, we just want to ensure airport security. No offense, really." Monica chuckled. "Let me ask you something," she said, her eyes boring into them like a judge's. "If I were a white woman in a suit, walking confidently out of a secure area, would you stop me?" The question left James and Brian speechless. They couldn't answer right away because the truth was so obvious. They couldn't justify their actions with any other reason than one: racial prejudice. Monica continued, her voice calm but sharp. "You have no reasonable cause to suspect me. I have done nothing suspicious, violated no security protocols, given you no indication that I should be stopped." She took a step forward, causing James and Brian to reflexively step back. "So what is the only thing that has caught your attention? The color of my skin?" Brian swallowed, trying to find an answer, but no words could salvage the situation. At this time, a group of passengers nearby began to pay attention to the conversation. A few people took out their phones and started filming. A middle-aged woman frowned and said, "What is going on?" A man standing nearby immediately replied, "These two cops just handcuffed an FBI agent just because she is black." Murmurs arose, and the crowd grew larger. Angry glances fell on James and Brian. An older man in a suit shook his head. "Unbelievable! This kind of thing still exists in New York?" A young woman held up her phone and zoomed in on the two officers. "We have to post this online. Let's see how far they can go." James and Brian began to feel scared. They thought that an apology would be enough to end this, but they did not expect that the incident would be recorded and spread right at the scene. Brian panicked, raising his hands as if to calm the crowd. "Everyone, please calm down. This is just a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" A woman angrily pointed at them. "He just called her a big shot nigger. I heard everything." James felt sweat run down his spine. The situation was getting out of control. Meanwhile, Monica remained completely calm. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. A few seconds later, the other end picked up. "This is Dr. Monica Harris. I would like to report an incident of abuse of power and racial discrimination at JFK Airport." Her voice was clear and decisive. "Send the internal affairs team immediately." James and Brian turned pale. Brian opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. James, who was always confident and arrogant, now felt his throat tighten. It didn't take long for law enforcement to respond to the shocking incident. Immediately after receiving Monica Harris's call, the FBI's Internal Affairs Division quickly swung into action. In less than an hour, a team of investigators was at JFK Airport, where James and Brian were detained for questioning. When Captain Robert Mitchell, their immediate superior, entered the room, his eyes were sharp and full of disappointment. He had been in the service for many years and had seen many cases of officers behaving inappropriately, but this incident was far beyond what he could accept. "James Walker, Brian Carter," Mitchell said in a low voice, looking directly at his two subordinates. "You two have made a serious mistake." James opened his mouth to say something, but Mitchell raised his hand to stop him. "I don't want to hear any excuses. We have all the evidence, the surveillance video, the witness statements, and especially the official report from Dr. Harris." Brian clenched his fists, his face pale. We didn't mean to." Mitchell looked at them with disgust. "Unintentional? You two think handcuffing a high-ranking FBI official without just cause just because she is black is unintentional? You two have disgraced the force." James bowed his head, unable to argue. Mitchell sighed heavily, then made a decision on the spot. "From now on, you two are suspended indefinitely. A formal investigation will be conducted, and I will make sure that you will be held accountable for your actions." The announcement hit James and Brian like a hammer. Suspension. They knew exactly what that meant. Once they were investigated for abuse of power, their chances of returning to the industry were slim to none. In the days that followed, the incident quickly spread across social media. A video of Monica being handcuffed at the airport was posted on social media, attracting millions of views and angry comments from the public. Under pressure from the public, the investigation proceeded transparently and quickly. The FBI, along with the New York Police Department, reviewed all the evidence, including statements from Monica, airport employees, and surveillance footage. The investigation results are clear. James Walker and Brian Carter abused their power and engaged in racist behavior. With this conclusion, both were not only immediately fired from the police force, but also blacklisted, meaning they would never have the opportunity to work in law enforcement again. When he received the decision to fire him, James threw his police badge on the table. "This is unfair," he shouted. Brian was completely devastated. "Please, don't do this to us. We can make it right." But no one listened. Justice was served. After this incident, Monica received a series of interview invitations from major media channels. Monica looked straight into the camera lens, her voice resolute and strong. "My experience is not an isolated incident. How many other people of color have been treated like this? But they have no title, no power, no one to stand up for them. The system needs to change. Police cannot continue to abuse their power with impunity. Her speech sparked a wave of heated debate across the United States. A series of peaceful protests were held calling for law enforcement reform. Many politicians and high-ranking officials also spoke out in favor of changes to the police oversight system. Within months, James and Brian had disappeared from the force. No police department wanted to hire two people who had abused their power and been publicly shamed. Meanwhile, Monica continues her work at the FBI, but now she has a larger mission, fighting to eliminate racism in the legal system. One evening, after giving a major speech on judicial reform, Monica left the headquarters and got into her car. She sat silently for a moment, remembering the moment when two police officers handcuffed her without hesitation. At that time, they had power in their hands. They believed they could do anything without being held accountable. But they were wrong. Monica smiled slightly, looking out at the bright New York City outside. She knew the fight was long, but at least today, justice had won. Those who abuse power will always pay, and those who dare to stand up for the truth, even alone, will make a huge difference in the world. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.